The wind howled through the narrow streets of San Francisco, biting through the layers of clothing that Jake Marshall had thrown on in a rush. He stood on the edge of the crumbling pier, looking out across the water at the silhouette of Alcatraz Island, its weathered stone structure looming like a ghost from a forgotten past. Jake's fingers gripped the railing tightly, his knuckles white, but it wasn't the chill that made his hands shake. It was the question that had haunted him for as long as he could remember: did the Alcatraz escapees actually survive? Did they? Jake muttered to himself, his breath visible in the cold night air. It was a question he had asked since he was a kid, when his father, always a man of few words, would stare off into the distance and say, "Some mysteries are better left unsolved." But Jake wasn't the kind of person who could just let things go. Maybe it was in his blood, the need to uncover the truth, to dig through layers of silence and lies until the answers were clear. His father, a former prison guard at Alcatraz, had never told him what he knew about the escape. Jake could see the shadow in his eyes whenever the topic came up. Something was hidden there, and now, Jake was determined to find it. A soft, familiar beep from his phone interrupted his thoughts. Jake pulled it from his pocket, glancing at the screen. A new message. "We need to talk. Come to the library." It was from Caroline, the local historian he'd been working with over the past few weeks. She had been digging through old records related to the 1962 escape, and she had found something. Jake had no idea what it was, but he could feel the excitement bubbling in his chest. Without a second thought, he shoved the phone back in his pocket, turned away from the water, and made his way to the library. The old building was dimly lit, with rows of dusty bookshelves that seemed to stretch on forever. Jake had always found something comforting about libraries, the quiet hum of knowledge waiting to be unlocked. As he walked past the heavy wooden tables, he spotted Caroline sitting at a table near the back, her laptop open, stacks of files surrounding her like an organized chaos. "Jake, over here," she called, her voice a mix of excitement and something else, something serious, like she was about to drop a bombshell. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, eyeing the stacks of documents she had accumulated. The air between them crackled with anticipation. "What did you find?" Jake asked, leaning forward. Caroline didn't answer immediately. Instead, she clicked through a few files on her laptop, her fingers moving quickly over the keys. Finally, she turned the screen toward him. There, on the screen, was a faded photograph. It was of three men. Frank Morris, and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, standing together, smiling, their faces locked in a moment of freedom, before the world came crashing down. "Where did you get this?" Jake asked, feeling a surge of energy. Caroline pointed to a document beside her. "I found it buried in some old records from the FBI's investigation into the escape. It's a copy of a letter that was supposedly sent to a private investigator shortly after the escape. The letter was never made public, and neither was this photo." Jake studied the image, his mind racing. "But this is impossible," he muttered. The escapees were presumed dead. They vanished without a trace. How could they still be alive? Caroline's eyes met his, her gaze intense. "That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out, Jake. There are too many inconsistencies in the official story. I think they survived, and someone doesn't want that known." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This was it. The break he had been hoping for. A new lead. Something that could change everything. "This letter, what does it say?" he asked. Caroline flipped the document over and began to read aloud. "To whom it may concern, it has come to my attention that the three men who escaped Alcatraz on the night of June 11, 1962, are alive and well. I have seen them. I have spoken with them. If you wish to know more, you will need to meet me in person. I will not be found easily, but I assure you, I know where they are." Jake's heart raced. The letter was signed with a name Jake didn't recognize. It wasn't a name from the investigation. It was someone else, a witness, a person with answers. Caroline closed the laptop with a sharp snap, and the room felt suddenly quieter, more serious. Jake, this letter wasn't just some random piece of junk. It's a thread we can follow. This could be the key to everything. Jake's mind raced as the possibilities unfolded in front of him. They survived. They made it. But why hide? He felt a surge of adrenaline. He had to know more. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they were only fragments. He couldn't let it go. He couldn't walk away now. Jake stood up abruptly, pacing the small space between the rows of bookshelves. We need to find this person. Whoever wrote this letter, he knows where they are. He knows the truth. Caroline grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. Jake, hold on. This could be dangerous. The people behind this, whoever they are, they don't want this information getting out. You need to be careful. Jake stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked down at Caroline, her worried eyes meeting his. I'm not backing down now, he said, his voice steady but full of resolve. I have to know the truth. Caroline hesitated, then nodded. I'll help you, but you have to promise me one thing. What's that? Promise me you won't get too close to the people involved. This is bigger than you think. Jake didn't answer immediately. He was already thinking ahead, imagining the steps he needed to take. There was no turning back. Not now. I promise, he said, though in his gut, he knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. As he left the library, Jake felt the weight of the mystery settle around him like a cloak. The Alcatraz escape was more than just an old story. It was a door to something far bigger, something that had been buried for decades. And now, he was the one who had to uncover it. The escapees hadn't just vanished. They'd survived. But why? What had they been running from? And who was trying to keep the truth from coming to light? Jake looked out toward Alcatraz, its shadow stretching long across the water. He was about to find out. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jake Marshall was about to find out the answer to his own question. Jake Marshall leaned back against his car, staring at the setting sun as it cast a warm orange glow over the San Francisco skyline. He had always found something oddly peaceful about the city at dusk, the way the shadows seemed to stretch and pull over the streets, giving everything a sense of mystery. It was fitting. After all, he was no stranger to mystery. It had been a part of his life for as long as he could remember. His father, Frank Marshall, had worked as a guard at Alcatraz for over a decade, witnessing the most notorious criminals in the country firsthand. To the outside world, Frank was just another stern, no-nonsense prison guard, doing his job in the shadows of one of the most infamous prisons in history. But to Jake, Frank was something more. He was a man of contradictions, a father who had never truly been present, even when he was physically there. Growing up, Jake had always felt the coldness in his father's eyes, the distance in his voice whenever the topic of Alcatraz came up. Frank never spoke about his time there, never shared stories of the inmates, the escape attempts, or the lives of the men who had walked through the prison gates. It was as if the whole chapter of his life had been locked away, buried under a heavy silence. And yet, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Jake remembered the day he'd finally asked his father about the escape. He was 15 at the time, curious and headstrong. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the air thick with the smell of coffee and the sound of a crackling radio. Jake had been trying to understand why his father had never talked about the escape that had captured the nation's attention, the one that had taken place the year before Jake was born, the one that no one could seem to explain. "What do you think happened to them, Dad?" Jake had asked, trying to mask his impatience. "The escapees, I mean. Did they survive? Do you think they made it out?" Frank's eyes had darkened at the mention of Alcatraz. He put down his coffee cup, his fingers gripping the porcelain so tightly Jake thought it might break. There was a long pause before his father spoke, his voice low and measured. "Some questions are better left unanswered, son," Frank had replied, his eyes hardening like steel. "You'll never get the truth about Alcatraz. People like you and me, we're just supposed to keep our mouths shut and do our jobs." Jake remembered the knot in his stomach as his father stood up, the conversation abruptly ending. Frank never offered any more details about the escape, about his time at the prison, or about the men who had vanished into the night. The more Jake pushed, the more his father withdrew, as if every question was a threat to the carefully constructed walls Frank had built around himself. The tension between father and son grew as Jake got older. The more Jake tried to understand his father's past, the more elusive it became. He knew there was something his father was hiding, something he didn't want Jake to know. But the older Jake got, the more he understood that it wasn't just about the escape from Alcatraz. It was about something deeper, something personal, something that was too painful for Frank to confront. Now, standing in front of his apartment, Jake felt the weight of his father's silence press down on him once again. But this time, he wasn't going to back down. He had to know the truth about the escapees. He had to know what had happened on that fateful night in 1962. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his reverie. It was Caroline again, her message simple but urgent: "We need to talk about what comes next." Jake sighed and shoved the phone back into his pocket. He wasn't sure what he expected to find in Caroline's research, but every new clue felt like a piece of a larger puzzle he had been piecing together for years. It was strange. Despite all the secrecy, despite his father's refusal to speak about it, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this investigation was about more than just uncovering the truth about 3 escapees. It was about his father. It was about unraveling a story that had been buried deep within their family history, one that Jake needed to understand if he was ever going to move forward. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Jake stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor of his apartment building. The ride up was slow, giving him time to think. The images of the escapees' faces haunted him: Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. They were free men, or at least they had been, once. But what had happened after the escape? Had they really made it out alive? And if they had, why had they disappeared so completely? Jake's thoughts wandered back to his father's cryptic words: "Some questions are better left unanswered." The more Jake thought about it, the more he realized that his father had always been hiding something, something important, something that might explain why Frank Marshall, the man who had witnessed the escape firsthand, refused to acknowledge it. The elevator dinged, and Jake stepped out onto his floor. His apartment was small, but it had a certain charm to it. Stacks of books, old newspapers, and photographs scattered on the walls. It was a place that felt comfortable, a place that allowed him to think in silence. Jake dropped his coat on the couch and sat down at his desk, the pile of files Caroline had sent him waiting to be sorted through. He flipped open the first file. It was a collection of old police reports, detailing the escape and the aftermath. There were interviews with guards, statements from inmates, and reports from the FBI. As he scanned the documents, Jake's eyes narrowed. There were so many inconsistencies. Details about the escape that didn't quite add up. And then there were the reports about the strange disappearances, strange, but not impossible. Jake sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the investigation begin to settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about proving that the escapees had survived. It was about digging into the heart of his own family's secrets. It was about confronting the silence that had defined his relationship with his father. For the first time in years, Jake felt like he was on the verge of something big. Something that would finally shed light on the past and give him the answers he had spent his entire life searching for. He wasn't sure what the truth would look like, but one thing was certain: he was going to find it. And nothing, not even his father's silence, would stop him. The rain had started to fall again, a soft drizzle that made everything seem blurred and distant. Jake Marshall sat in his car, parked just outside the old, run-down warehouse near the bay. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as he stared at the building before him. This was the place, the one Caroline had insisted they visit after she uncovered some new information. The location matched one of the names mentioned in the mysterious letter about the Alcatraz escapees. It was where the private investigator had supposedly met with someone who claimed to know their whereabouts. Jake's heart raced. It wasn't just the rain or the chill of the night that made him feel uneasy, it was the mounting tension, the sense that every step forward only led him deeper into a web of lies and half-truths. He had spent the past few days sifting through every scrap of information Caroline had given him, and the more he uncovered, the more the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fall into place, only to reveal new layers of mystery. Caroline had been relentless, diving into archives, cross-referencing old reports, and even reaching out to her network of historians who specialized in obscure parts of American history. The truth, as it seemed, was elusive, hidden beneath decades of silence and bureaucracy. But she had found something that had made Jake's skin crawl when he read it. According to one of the letters, sent by the private investigator to a journalist years after the escape, the Anglin brothers and Frank Morris had all disappeared under completely different circumstances than the official narrative suggested. But why had they vanished? Was it just fear of capture, or was there something else, something far more sinister, that had forced them into hiding? Jake let out a long breath, trying to calm his nerves. He didn't know what he was walking into tonight, but there was no turning back. He had to follow this lead, no matter where it took him. He just hoped Caroline had done enough research to ensure they weren't about to walk into something dangerous. As he opened the door to his car and stepped out into the rain, he checked his phone once more. A new message had appeared from Caroline. "I found something more. Be careful." Jake tucked the phone back into his pocket and started walking toward the warehouse, pulling his collar up against the rain. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking structure of brick and steel, its windows dark and foreboding. It looked abandoned, exactly the kind of place where secrets could be kept, unnoticed and untouched for years. When he reached the door, he paused. The metal handle was cold under his fingers as he turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with rusted machinery and long-forgotten equipment. Jake stepped inside cautiously, his shoes clicking on the concrete floor. He felt an eerie sense of déjà vu, as if he had been here before. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the rain outside. He took a few more steps inside, eyes scanning the room. It was a cavernous space, filled with shadows and half-seen shapes. In the far corner of the warehouse, a single light bulb flickered, casting an unreliable glow on the walls. A figure emerged from the darkness, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. It was a man, tall and wiry, wearing a worn leather jacket. He looked like he had been waiting for someone, waiting for Jake. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed by a hood pulled low over his brow. "Jake Marshall," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "I thought you'd show up eventually." Jake's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the person who had sent the mysterious letter, the one who claimed to know what had happened to the Alcatraz escapees. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, trying to steady his voice. "How do you know about the letter? What's this all about?" The man chuckled softly, a dry sound that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. "You're looking for answers, aren't you? About the escape. About your father. About why Frank Morris and the Anglins disappeared." He stepped closer, the shadows swallowing his form as he moved. "I can give you the answers, but you won't like them." Jake's blood ran cold. Every instinct told him to be cautious, to turn around and leave, but the lure of the truth was too strong. He had to know. He had come too far to turn back now. "What do you know?" Jake asked, voice firm, though his mind raced with questions. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved past Jake, approaching an old filing cabinet against the far wall. He yanked open the drawer and rummaged through it, pulling out a stack of yellowing papers. As he turned to face Jake, he held up a worn photograph, one that immediately caught Jake's eye. It was a photo of three men standing together, smiling broadly. The men were unmistakable, Frank Morris, and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. But this wasn't the famous escape photo. This was different. In this picture, they looked younger, relaxed, as if they were standing in front of a new life, free of the prison walls. Jake felt his throat tighten. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his heart pounding. The man smiled darkly, folding the photo and tucking it into the pocket of his jacket. "This," he said softly, "is where the story really begins. They didn't just escape, Jake. They were helped. And your father, he's part of it." Jake's stomach lurched. He stepped back, the words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. "What do you mean?" "My father helped them escape." The man nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Your father was more involved than you realize. But not in the way you think. It's a tangled web, one that reaches further than you could imagine. And you, Jake, are in the middle of it." Before Jake could respond, the man's voice dropped lower. "You've been digging into something that's been hidden for decades, and now you're going to wish you hadn't. Because the more you uncover, the more you'll realize, you're not just chasing the truth. You're chasing your own downfall." Jake's mind raced. Was this a warning? A threat? Or was it the beginning of something even darker than he had imagined? "Who are you?" Jake asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "I'm the one who knows the truth. The one who's been waiting for you to finally ask the right questions." Suddenly, the room seemed to close in on Jake. He wasn't sure who this man was, but he had a sickening feeling that the answers he sought were not going to come easily, or without consequences. As the man turned and faded back into the shadows, Jake was left standing in the cold, uncertain darkness of the warehouse, his heart pounding with the knowledge that this was only the beginning of something much more dangerous. And now, there was no turning back. The night was thick with tension as Jake Marshall left the warehouse, his mind racing with the weight of everything he had just learned. The man in the shadows, the warning, the photograph. All of it felt like pieces to a puzzle he wasn't ready to solve, but there was no turning back now. The questions about his father, the escape, and the mysterious figures involved in it all were spiraling out of control, and Jake knew he was now in deeper than ever before. The rain continued to pour as he climbed into his car, the windshield wipers working tirelessly to clear the way as he pulled away from the warehouse. Jake didn't know where to go, didn't know what to think, but he had one thing on his mind: Caroline. If anyone could help him make sense of this mess, it was her. She had been at the forefront of this investigation from the very start, tirelessly researching, digging into old records, and tracking down leads. She had shared everything she knew with him, and now he needed her more than ever. If they were going to uncover the truth about the escapees and their connection to his father, they had to be on the same page. He sent her a quick text as he drove, his fingers trembling slightly as he typed. "We need to meet. Something's not right. I have a lead." It didn't take long before she responded, as if she had been waiting for the message. "Where?" "I'll be there in an hour." Jake set his destination, the drive feeling like a blur as his thoughts consumed him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something much bigger than he had ever imagined. There were too many questions, too many layers of secrecy, and as much as he wanted to believe the escapees had made it out of Alcatraz, Jake was starting to doubt the official story. When he finally arrived at the small coffee shop where he and Caroline had often met to discuss the case, he found her sitting in the back corner, her eyes focused on a stack of papers spread out in front of her. She didn't even look up when he approached, so Jake slid into the seat across from her, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Caroline finally looked up, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jake let out a shaky breath, leaning back in his seat. "It's worse than I thought. The man I spoke to tonight, he knew too much. About my father. About the escape. There's something going on here that we don't understand. Caroline's eyes narrowed, her focus shifting. Tell me everything. Start at the beginning. He did, recounting the strange encounter in the warehouse, the man's cryptic warnings, and the photograph of his father with the escapees. As he spoke, Caroline's brow furrowed, her mind already piecing together the information. I knew your father had been involved in something at Alcatraz, but this is something else, she said quietly, her voice laced with both concern and disbelief. If what that man said is true, your father isn't just a guard. He's connected to the escape somehow. Jake nodded, his mind racing. That's what I'm trying to figure out. And I'm not sure I can trust this guy. He's too cryptic, too mysterious. But something tells me he's not lying. Caroline leaned forward, her eyes meeting his. Then we have to keep digging. We need more answers. What did the man mean when he said, "You're chasing your own downfall"? Does he know more about your father's role? Jake shook his head. I don't know, but it feels like there's more to the story. If the escapees did make it out, someone helped them. Someone on the inside. And my father. He's always avoided talking about it. But the more I dig, the more I feel like he's hiding something. Caroline sat back, her fingers drumming on the table as she processed everything Jake had said. We've got to get to the truth, Jake. But if this is bigger than we thought, we might be walking into something dangerous. You're not alone in this. I'm with you every step of the way. Jake appreciated the reassurance, but deep down, he knew they were already in too deep. The stakes had just risen, and now they had to navigate a dangerous path to uncover the truth. His mind flashed back to the moment when the man in the warehouse had said, "You're chasing your own downfall." What did he mean by that? Was someone trying to stop them from finding out the truth? The tension in the air seemed to grow heavier by the second. Jake leaned forward, his eyes meeting Caroline's with determination. We're not backing down. We have to keep going, no matter what. We owe it to the truth. And to my father. Caroline's gaze softened, but her resolve matched his. I'm with you. Let's keep digging. There's more to this story, Jake. I can feel it. Over the next few days, Jake and Caroline worked tirelessly, diving deeper into the mysterious circumstances surrounding the Alcatraz escape. They revisited old police reports, tracking down people who had been involved in the investigation at the time. The more they uncovered, the more it seemed as if the whole escape was a well-coordinated plan, one that involved more than just the three men who had escaped. Jake found himself feeling a growing sense of dread, especially as the pieces began to fit together. The man in the warehouse had been right. There were connections to his father that he hadn't been able to see before. But there was more to it, more than just the escape. Something darker, something even more dangerous, was lurking just beneath the surface. Caroline found a lead that might connect his father to the escape in a way Jake hadn't considered before. She had tracked down an old interview with one of the guards who had worked alongside Frank Marshall at Alcatraz. In the interview, the guard mentioned that Frank had been in the control tower the night of the escape, but his logbooks were mysteriously missing. It was a small detail, but it was a detail that didn't make sense. We need to talk to that guard, Caroline said one evening, her voice laced with urgency. He might know something. He might have seen something that could change everything. Jake's stomach churned as he thought about the implications. If the guard had information that could expose his father's role, it would shatter everything he thought he knew about the man who had raised him. But Jake wasn't going to let fear stop him. He had to know the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, they made their way to the address Caroline had found for the former guard. The house was located on the outskirts of the city, a small, unassuming place nestled in a quiet neighborhood. As they knocked on the door, Jake's heart hammered in his chest. This was it, the moment that could finally reveal everything. The door creaked open, and an elderly man with graying hair and a hunched back greeted them. His eyes were sharp, though, betraying a mind that hadn't lost its edge. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice thick with age. "We're looking for information about Alcatraz," Caroline began. "You worked there, didn't you?" "With Frank Marshall?" The man's eyes flickered, a flash of recognition passing through them. "I did. But I don't know what you're after. Frank's not around to answer your questions anymore." Jake took a step forward, his voice firm but respectful. "We need to know the truth. About the escape. About what really happened that night." The man's eyes grew darker, and for a moment, Jake wondered if they had made a mistake coming here. But then, slowly, the old man sighed and stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. "I've got a lot to say. But be warned, this is going to change everything you thought you knew." Jake and Caroline exchanged a glance before stepping inside, ready for the truth that was about to be revealed. The journey to uncover the truth about the Alcatraz escape had just taken a new turn. The pieces were falling into place, but with each revelation came more questions. What would they find at the end of this path? And what kind of danger were they really facing? One thing was certain, Jake was no longer just chasing the escapees. He was chasing his father's secret. And the closer he got, the more he realized how far he was willing to go to uncover it. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he followed the elderly man into the small living room. The door creaked shut behind them, and the air in the room felt thick with the weight of unspoken secrets. The man shuffled over to a dusty old recliner and sank into it with a groan, his gnarled hands clasped together as he looked up at Jake and Caroline. "Sit down," he said, his voice gravelly. "You've come a long way to hear this, so you might as well get comfortable." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He sat down in the chair opposite the old man, Caroline close behind him, her eyes alert, ready for whatever revelations were about to unfold. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Old photographs lined the mantelpiece, some yellowed with age, others in sharper focus, showing the man as a younger guard in his Alcatraz uniform. The old man cleared his throat, looking at both of them carefully, as if weighing the importance of what he was about to say. "I'm going to tell you everything. Everything I saw, everything I know. But I need you to understand one thing first." Jake leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's that?" The man stared at him, his eyes intense. "The truth will hurt you more than you realize. What you think you know, about your father, about the escape, it's not the whole story. It's only part of it." Jake's stomach tightened, a cold sense of dread creeping over him. He had feared this moment, feared that the deeper he dug, the darker the truth would become. But now, sitting in this small, quiet living room, he knew there was no going back. He had to know everything, no matter how painful it might be. The man sighed heavily, running a hand over his face as if to steady himself before speaking. Frank Marshall wasn't just a guard at Alcatraz. He was more involved than anyone realized. He had connections, people on the outside, people who helped plan the escape. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? How do you know this?" The man's eyes flickered with a hint of sadness. "I was in the control tower the night of the escape. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. Your father, Jake, he wasn't just watching over the inmates. He was involved in their plan." Jake's mind reeled. His father? Involved in a prison break? It was almost too much to process. Everything he thought he knew about Frank Marshall, the man who had raised him, was crashing down in front of him. "What did he do?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. The old man's expression darkened. "He was part of the team. He didn't just help the prisoners escape, he helped orchestrate the entire thing. There were others involved, too, guards, outsiders, people who wanted to see the escape happen, for their own reasons." Jake felt the ground beneath him shift. His father, his rock, the man who had always been there, had played a part in one of the most infamous escapes in American history. It was a betrayal, a stain on everything he had been taught about right and wrong. Why? Why would he do something like that? Jake asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. What was his reason? The old man shook his head slowly. I don't know. He never said. But I can tell you this, he wasn't the only one who knew. The whole prison was full of people with secrets, and some of them were willing to do anything to protect theirs. Caroline's eyes narrowed. So, what happened after the escape? Did your father ever talk about it? The man looked away, his gaze distant as if lost in the past. No. He never talked about it. Not to me, not to anyone. After the escape, everything changed. I tried to follow up, tried to figure out what happened, but it was like someone put a wall up around the whole thing. They wanted it buried, hidden. And I don't think your father ever wanted you to know. Jake's head was spinning. His mind fought to reconcile the man he had known with the man the old man was describing. Frank Marshall had been a hero in Jake's eyes, a man who had worked tirelessly to protect his family. Now, everything was in question. Why are you telling me this now? Jake asked, his voice tight with emotion. Why didn't you say anything sooner? The old man's eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of regret crossing his face. Because I didn't want to drag anyone else into it. But when I heard about you looking into the escape, when I saw you digging into your father's past, I knew you were getting too close to the truth. I couldn't let you walk away without knowing what happened. Jake's mind raced. The escape, the mysterious figures involved, the connections to his father, it was all too much to process in one sitting. But there was one thing that stuck with him. The man had mentioned the outside connections. If his father was involved, who else had been? Do you know who else was involved? Jake asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Who else helped? The old man hesitated, his eyes shifting nervously. There were whispers. People talked about a group, a secret organization that had a hand in things at Alcatraz. I don't know much, but there was talk of people who were working behind the scenes. People who knew things, who had power, and who could make sure things went smoothly. Jake's heart skipped a beat. A secret organization? Was this bigger than just his father? Were they being watched by forces they couldn't even understand? Do you have any names? Caroline pressed, leaning forward. Anything that can help us? The old man shook his head, but there was a trace of something in his eyes, something Jake couldn't quite place. I don't have names. But I know this, the truth is more dangerous than you think. The more you dig, the more you'll realize how deep this goes. And when you find out, you'll wish you hadn't. The warning hit Jake like a punch to the gut. The more they uncovered, the more it seemed like they were stepping into a world far darker than they had imagined. And as much as he wanted to turn back, he knew there was no way out now. Jake stood up, his mind racing with the pieces of the puzzle that were starting to fall into place. Thank you for telling us. But we're not done yet. We're going to find the rest of the story. We have to. The old man looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and resignation. Be careful, son. The truth is a dangerous thing to seek. And some things are better left buried. As Jake and Caroline left the small house, the weight of the old man's words hung heavy in the air. They had uncovered the first pieces of a truth that could shatter everything they had known. But there was more to find, more to uncover. And Jake wasn't ready to stop yet. He had to know the rest of the story. And the closer they got, the more they realized that the truth was something that could change everything, not just about the escape, but about the people they trusted the most. Jake's journey had just taken an even darker turn. The escape from Alcatraz was no longer just a mystery, it was a deep, tangled web of secrets, betrayals, and hidden agendas. And as the pieces continued to fall into place, Jake found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about his father, his family, and the truth that lay buried beneath the surface. The weight of the old man's words haunted Jake as he and Caroline walked out of the small house. The rain had stopped, but the air felt thick, heavy with the tension that hung between them. They didn't speak as they climbed into Jake's car, the silence between them uncomfortable but necessary. Jake's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, his father's involvement in the escape, the mysterious organization the old man had mentioned, and the dangerous truth that still eluded them. Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, and the closer they got to the truth, the more perilous the path ahead became. Caroline finally broke the silence as they drove. "Jake, do you believe him? The old man, I mean. Do you think your father was really involved in the escape?" Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He had thought about that very question 1,000 times since they left the house. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But something about the way he spoke, it felt like he knew more than he was telling us. And the fact that he didn't want to get involved until now, it makes me think we're onto something. Caroline nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. "I agree. But this secret organization, what if they're still out there? What if they're still protecting the people involved in the escape?" Jake's mind flashed to the photograph he had seen of his father with the escapees, the proof that Frank Marshall had been more than just a guard. His father's secret involvement in something so monumental, something so dangerous, had been hidden from him for his entire life. And now, it felt like they were on the edge of uncovering something far bigger than just an escape from a prison. This wasn't just about Alcatraz, it was about power, influence, and corruption that reached far beyond the prison walls. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Jake said, determination creeping into his voice. "If there's an organization out there, if people are still protecting the truth, we need to expose them. I need to know everything. I owe it to my father to understand what happened." Caroline gave him a reassuring look. "And we will. But we need to be careful. The deeper we go, the more dangerous it gets." Jake understood the warning. They had already walked into a storm, and the further they pushed, the more dangerous the game would become. But he couldn't stop now. He had come this far. His father's secrets had become his own. After a few minutes of driving in silence, Jake turned onto a quiet street that led to a small, inconspicuous building, one that Caroline had uncovered during her research. It was a local archive, hidden away from public view, where records from the Alcatraz era were stored. If there were answers to be found, this was where they would begin their final search. "Let's get inside and see if we can find anything new," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. As they entered the building, the musty smell of old paper and dust filled the air. The room was dimly lit, shelves upon shelves of records stacked high, covering decades of history. Caroline led the way, flipping through old files, her eyes scanning each document with precision. Jake stood beside her, waiting, hoping for a breakthrough. Hours passed, and the tension in the room grew. Every document they read, every piece of evidence they uncovered, seemed to lead them in circles. Nothing new, nothing concrete. It was as if the past had been scrubbed clean. Jake's frustration was mounting. How could something this important, this monumental, be so carefully hidden? Then, just as they were about to give up, Caroline's voice broke through the silence. "Jake. I think I found something." He hurried over to her side, his heart racing. She was holding an old, tattered file, its edges frayed and worn with age. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. "What is it?" Jake asked, his voice tight. Caroline's eyes scanned the pages rapidly, her face unreadable. "It's a letter. Written by a man named Vincent Klein. He was a high-ranking officer at Alcatraz. He was involved in the investigation into the escape, but he had information that was never made public." Jake's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This could be the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Caroline continued reading aloud. "It says here that Klein suspected there was more to the escape than what the public had been told. He mentions a network of insiders, people who had the power to manipulate the investigation and keep the truth hidden. And he suggests that Frank Marshall was more than just a bystander. He was a key player, possibly even the mastermind behind the escape plan. Jake felt his stomach drop as the words sank in. The letter wasn't just confirming his worst fears, it was revealing the unthinkable. His father, Frank Marshall, had been at the center of the escape, not just a part of it, but an active player in the plan. Caroline paused for a moment, looking up at Jake with a mixture of disbelief and sympathy. "Jake, this changes everything." Jake's hands shook as he took the letter from her, scanning it with a sense of disbelief. He couldn't process it. His father, the man who had raised him, the man he had always looked up to, was involved in something this monumental. It was too much to take in. I don't know what to say," Jake whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "This is my father. I've known him my whole life. And now I don't even recognize him." Caroline placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. "Jake, this isn't easy. But you have to remember, people are complicated. Your father, he made choices. Choices that weren't always black and white. And we may never know the full truth behind his involvement. But you can't let this destroy everything you knew about him. He's still your father." Jake nodded slowly, but the pain in his chest didn't ease. The man he had known was now a stranger, a shadow in the past that he couldn't fully understand. But there was one thing he did know: the truth had to come out. For his father. For the people who were still being protected by the network of insiders. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I have to finish this. I have to find out who's behind all of this. And I will. I won't stop until I do." Caroline smiled faintly. "I know you won't. And I'm with you every step of the way." As Jake and Caroline walked out of the archive, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the street. The world felt different now. The truth was out there, but it was more complicated and dangerous than they had ever imagined. And as Jake glanced at Caroline, he realized that the journey wasn't just about uncovering his father's secrets, it was about uncovering the truth about the escape and the powerful people still protecting it. With every step, they were getting closer to the answers they sought. But they were also getting closer to the people who didn't want those answers to see the light of day. Jake didn't know what the future held, but he was ready for whatever came next. He had come this far. And there was no turning back. The truth had been buried for far too long, but Jake was determined to dig it up. For his father. For the escapees. And for himself. And as they drove off into the night, Jake felt a new resolve settle in his chest. The escape from Alcatraz was only the beginning of a much deeper mystery. A mystery that, once solved, would change everything. The day after they uncovered the letter, Jake and Caroline sat in the small cafe downtown, the faint hum of background conversations mixing with the clink of coffee cups. Jake had barely slept. His mind kept racing over the implications of the letter they had found, and his thoughts were a tangled web of confusion and determination. Frank Marshall, his father, had been at the heart of the Alcatraz escape, part of a complex network of insiders who had manipulated the investigation. The more he uncovered, the more he realized just how deep the conspiracy went. "I think we need to find out more about this Vincent Klein," Jake said, breaking the silence between them as he stirred his coffee. "If he was this high-ranking officer who suspected something bigger was going on, maybe he knows more. Maybe there's more of his stuff hidden away, papers, records, anything that could lead us to the next piece." Caroline nodded. "But where do we even start? He wasn't a household name like some of the other figures involved. If he was an officer on the island, his records might not be easy to access. We'll need to dig deeper." Jake's eyes sharpened with focus. "We can't waste time. If Klein knew about the insiders, then he's a key piece to the puzzle. If he were still alive, I'd try to find him. But what if someone has kept his files hidden for a reason? Caroline's gaze flickered toward the door. She didn't say anything right away, but Jake saw the calculation in her eyes. He knew she had a plan. She always did. I might know someone who can help, she said cautiously, lowering her voice. But it's not going to be easy. This person, let's just say they operate in the shadows. They're not someone you can just walk up to and ask for help. Jake frowned. I'm not looking for easy. Who are we talking about? Caroline hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. His name is Marcus Reed. He's a former investigator, now a private consultant, and let's just say his methods aren't exactly conventional. But he knows how to get things that aren't supposed to be found. If there's anyone who might have access to Klein's hidden files or records about the insider network, it's him. Jake leaned back in his chair, his mind churning with the possibility. Marcus Reed sounded like someone who played on the edge of the law. Dangerous, maybe, but necessary if they were going to uncover the truth about the escape and the people involved. I'm not exactly thrilled about getting involved with someone who operates outside the law, Jake said, his voice heavy with caution. But I don't see any other way. Caroline smiled, though it was more of a grim smirk than anything else. Sometimes, the truth requires a little risk. The cafe's door jingled as a man entered, and Jake's attention snapped to him. The man was tall, wearing a dark coat that was clearly out of place in the warm weather. He looked around the cafe with a calculating gaze, as though he were scanning for potential threats or opportunities. His eyes met Caroline's, and she gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. The man walked over to their table, his steps confident but deliberate. He didn't sit down immediately. Instead, he stood with his hands in his pockets, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. You must be Jake, the man said, his voice smooth but edged with something darker. And you must be Caroline. I've heard quite a bit about you. Jake studied him carefully. There was something about Marcus Reed that immediately put him on edge. He wasn't sure if it was the man's easy confidence or the way he seemed to move through the world with a kind of detached purpose, but something about him didn't sit right. Yet, Jake couldn't deny the sharpness in his eyes, the kind of sharpness that suggested Marcus was exactly the kind of person they needed. I'm not sure we're exactly friends yet, Jake said cautiously. Caroline tells me you can help us find some answers. Is that true? Marcus chuckled darkly, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. Help? Oh, I'm not in the habit of just helping people. But I have what you need. It's just a matter of how much you're willing to pay for it. Caroline didn't hesitate. We're not interested in games, Marcus. We need information about Vincent Klein. We need to know what he knew, who he was connected to, and if there's anything hidden that can connect Frank Marshall to the Alcatraz escape. We know you have access to records that most people don't. Marcus' eyes narrowed. You're asking for a lot. You don't know the whole story, and you don't know what you're getting into. People who get too close to this, well, let's just say they end up with more questions than answers. Jake clenched his jaw. I'm not here for warnings. I'm here for the truth. So, are you going to help us or not? There was a long pause, as Marcus studied Jake, his eyes calculating. Finally, he leaned forward, his expression turning serious. I'll help you. But be clear, this won't be easy. There's a lot of people who don't want this stuff getting out. It's dangerous, and it'll put you both in a situation you can't back out of. But if you're in, I'll find the records you need. But it's going to cost you. Jake looked at Caroline, who nodded, her eyes steely. We're in. Marcus gave a satisfied smile. Good. I'll start pulling the records, but don't expect them to come easily. And don't expect to walk out of this unchanged. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and a constant stream of tension. Marcus was true to his word, he dug deep, pulling strings, making calls, and using his extensive network of contacts to uncover hidden files. But every time he came back to Jake and Caroline, the news was more unsettling. "I've got Klein's records," Marcus said one evening, handing over a manila folder filled with crumpled, aged papers. "But it's not pretty. Klein wasn't just an officer. He was a man on the inside. He knew things. And from the looks of it, he tried to leak some of them, but it didn't end well for him." Jake's heart raced as he sifted through the papers. The records painted a picture of Klein's obsession with uncovering the corruption at Alcatraz, a corruption that went deeper than just the escape. Klein had been part of a small, shadowy group of officers who had realized that the escape was just the tip of the iceberg. But the more Klein dug, the more dangerous his investigation became. The final report suggested that Klein had uncovered something even bigger, something tied directly to the escape network, and someone had silenced him before he could expose it. Whoever was behind the escape, Jake muttered, they didn't just want to break out prisoners. They were protecting something far bigger. Something connected to Alcatraz itself. Marcus looked at Jake with a cold smile. "That's the thing about this story, Jake. The deeper you go, the more you'll realize, some things are meant to stay buried." As Jake stared at the documents before him, a chilling realization settled over him. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous his pursuit of the truth became. But now, with the hidden hand of corruption and deception revealed, there was no turning back. He was already too deep. With Marcus Reed's help, they were closer than ever to uncovering the truth. But the deeper they delved, the more Jake knew that finding the answers would come at a steep price, one that might change everything about his life. And as he glanced over at Caroline, her face resolute and determined, Jake knew that they had crossed a line. They were no longer just chasing a story. They were chasing a shadow, a powerful, dangerous secret that might be bigger than anything they could have imagined. But there was no turning back now. They had made their choice. And the truth was waiting for them. The next few weeks felt like a blur. The rush of uncovering long-buried secrets, the terrifying realization that they were poking at something far bigger than just the escape from Alcatraz, and the constant shadow of danger hanging over them, it was all-consuming. Jake hadn't expected it to be easy, but this was beyond what he had imagined. Every day, Marcus delivered more records, more fragments of the past, each one more unsettling than the last. Klein's investigation had been far more comprehensive than they'd initially thought, and his findings were like pieces of a broken mirror, each one reflecting a part of the truth, but never the whole picture. Jake stood over a desk filled with maps, reports, and scribbled notes. The walls of his apartment were cluttered with pictures, many of them from the Alcatraz era, showing both familiar and unfamiliar faces. His father was there, alongside the escapees, his role now clear. But there were other names, names Jake had never heard of, and each of them seemed to be connected to a web of power that extended far beyond the walls of the infamous prison. Caroline was sitting on the couch, scanning through more documents Marcus had dropped off that morning. Her face was pale, her eyes tired but determined. It had been a long few weeks for both of them, but they weren't backing down. Not now. "Jake," Caroline called softly, her voice strained. "You need to see this." Jake turned, his stomach tight. Caroline had that look, the one that told him this was important. She handed him a worn folder, its edges curling as if it had been handled too many times. The label on the folder read, "Vincent Klein, Final Report." The documents inside were brittle and yellowed, the ink faded with age. As Jake skimmed through the report, his heart began to pound in his chest. Klein's investigation had not only revealed the network of insiders who had orchestrated the Alcatraz escape, but it also pointed to something far darker, a hidden agenda that stretched all the way to the highest levels of government and private corporations. Klein had discovered that the escape was not just about freeing prisoners, it was a distraction. A carefully orchestrated plan designed to cover up a much larger operation. "Jake," Caroline said quietly, "Klein found something bigger than just the escape. Something to do with illegal operations, black market dealings, and some very powerful people. The escape was just a smokescreen. It's all connected. Frank Marshall wasn't just protecting the escapees, he was protecting the network behind it. Jake's mind reeled. His father, a part of a secretive operation. The weight of the revelation was suffocating. He thought he was chasing a simple story, one of escape and mystery. But now it seemed like he was tangled in a conspiracy that stretched far beyond Alcatraz, and potentially all the way to the heart of American power. Who else was involved? Jake asked, his voice tight. Who else knew about this? Caroline's eyes darkened. That's the thing. Klein was getting close to the truth, too close. But he was silenced before he could make the final connections. And the names he mentioned, well, we've already run into some of them. Marcus, he's one of them. But there are others. People who don't want this getting out. Jake felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The danger was real. The people who didn't want the truth revealed were watching them, pulling strings from the shadows. They were closing in, and they wouldn't stop until they silenced anyone who threatened to expose the truth. We need to get to the people Klein was after, Jake said through gritted teeth. They're the ones who have the answers. But Caroline shook her head. We can't just charge in, Jake. Klein tried that, and look where it got him. We need to be careful. If we push too hard, we could end up just like him. Jake's jaw clenched. I don't care. I'm not stopping until I get the truth. I owe it to my father. Caroline's face softened with sympathy, but her eyes were firm. And I'll help you. But we need to be smart. If we're going to do this, we need to think 2 steps ahead. Trust Marcus to get us the rest of the information. But we have to be ready. Because once we start digging deeper into this, there's no going back. Jake knew she was right. They couldn't go back now. Not after everything they had uncovered. The truth had already begun to pull them in, and they were already too deep to turn back. It was a few days later when Marcus reached out to them. He didn't call. Instead, he left a simple message on Jake's phone, we need to meet. It's time to finish this. Jake and Caroline made their way to a quiet, run-down bar on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the type of place you visited for fun. It was dimly lit, with only a few patrons scattered around. The air felt thick with the scent of stale beer and smoke, the kind of place where people came to forget things they didn't want to remember. Marcus was sitting at the back booth, his eyes scanning the room as though he were always alert for danger. When he saw Jake and Caroline approach, he motioned them over. Glad you could make it, Marcus said, his tone a little more serious than usual. Things have gotten complicated. We're getting close to the end of this, but we have to move fast. Jake sat down across from him, Caroline beside him. What do you have for us? Jake asked, his voice urgent. Marcus slid a manila envelope across the table. Everything you need to take this to the next level. It's not just about Klein anymore. The operation goes deeper than you think. There are names, locations, accounts, everything you need to bring this to the surface. But there's a catch. You need to decide who to trust, and how far you're willing to go. Jake's eyes narrowed. What's the catch? Marcus met his gaze, his expression hard. There are people in high places who will stop at nothing to keep this quiet. If you're going to expose the truth, you're going to need help, real help. The kind that comes at a price. Caroline leaned forward. What kind of price are we talking about? Marcus's lips curled into a cold smile. The kind of price that will change your lives forever. Jake looked down at the envelope, his mind spinning. They were on the verge of discovering something so enormous, so world-shaking, that it could destroy everything they knew. The network of insiders, the corruption, the conspiracy, it was all coming to a head. And as he glanced at Caroline, he realized just how far they had come. But he also knew that the journey ahead would be more dangerous than anything they had faced so far. The truth was out there. And now, it was time to expose it. But at what cost? The cold wind bit at Jake's face as he stood outside the dimly lit bar, the envelope heavy in his hand. Caroline had already jumped into the car, her eyes scanning the surroundings as though she were expecting someone to leap from the shadows. Jake paused for a moment, staring down at the manila envelope Marcus had handed him. He had known there would be risks. Everyone did when you were chasing the truth. But this? This felt like a whole new level of danger. He slid into the passenger seat beside Caroline, and without a word, she started the engine and pulled out into the quiet street. The night was eerily still, and Jake could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. They were no longer just reporters trying to uncover a story. They were stepping into a much darker world, a world where truth was a commodity, and one that could cost them everything. "Are you sure we're ready for this?" Caroline asked, her voice low and steady, betraying none of the worry she must have felt. Jake nodded, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. "I don't know. But we don't have much of a choice anymore. We have to follow this through. It's bigger than just my father. It's bigger than the escape." Caroline turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "I know. But the deeper we go, the more dangerous it gets. Marcus. I don't trust him. Not fully. He's playing his own game, and we're just pieces." "I don't trust him either," Jake admitted, staring out the window as they sped down the empty streets. "But he's the only one with access to the information we need. If we're going to get to the truth, we have to work with him." Caroline didn't reply immediately, but Jake could feel her mind working. She was calculating, weighing the options, the risks, and the costs. But in the end, they both knew they had no other choice. Back at Jake's apartment, the two of them sat in silence, the manila envelope between them. As the clock ticked on, the weight of what they were about to do hung in the air, suffocating them both. Jake opened the envelope, his heart racing with anticipation and fear. Inside, there were several documents, names, dates, codes, and maps that made no sense at first glance. It was like trying to decipher a foreign language. But Jake had been trained for this. He'd spent his entire career as an investigative journalist following crumbs of information that others couldn't see, connecting dots that were often invisible. The first document was a list of names. Some of them were familiar from his research, government officials, former Alcatraz personnel, and corporate bigwigs, but many of them were completely unknown. Next was a map of the San Francisco Bay Area, with several red markings and notes scribbled in the margins. Some of the places were familiar. Alcatraz Island, the old prison, various waterfront locations, but others seemed off the grid. Hidden places, black sites, or perhaps safe houses. Jake's eyes narrowed as he flipped to the next page. It was a timeline, and this one made his stomach drop. It detailed events stretching back decades, all somehow linked to the Alcatraz escape, but the deeper he got into the timeline, the more it became clear that this wasn't just about a jailbreak. It was about an entire underground operation involving everything from smuggling to espionage. "Caroline," Jake said, his voice thick with disbelief, "this goes way back. The escape wasn't a distraction, it was part of something bigger. This whole operation, this whole network, has been in place for years." Caroline took the documents from his hands and scanned them quickly, her brow furrowing with concentration. "This is insane," she murmured. "It's not just about freeing prisoners. It's about power. Control. There are names here that go all the way up to Washington. And look at these locations, some of them are linked to underground networks, the kind of thing that doesn't just disappear." Jake rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Marcus knew what he was handing us. He's not just feeding us information, he's pushing us into the deep end. If we follow this trail, it'll lead straight to the heart of something so dangerous that we may not survive it. "But we can't stop now," Caroline said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying the fear she was trying to suppress. The truth is in there, Jake. It's all connected. Your father wasn't just part of the escape, he was part of this whole system. We have to keep going. We have to find the people who did this, and we have to expose them. Jake nodded slowly, the determination in her voice giving him the strength he needed to push forward. You're right. We've come too far to turn back. They spent the next few days working through the documents, cross-referencing names, locations, and events. Every new piece of information brought them closer to the truth, but it also brought them closer to danger. It was as if they were stepping into a spider's web, each new discovery tightening the noose around their necks. Then, one night, Marcus called. His voice was colder than usual, more urgent. You're getting too close, he warned, his tone grave. You need to stop digging. There are people who will do anything to protect this. You think you're uncovering the truth, but all you're doing is digging your own graves. There's no way to stop it now, but you don't want to know what comes next. Jake's heart thudded in his chest. What do you mean? We can't stop now. We've found enough to bring them down. Marcus sighed on the other end, the weight of the situation clear in his voice. You think you're just dealing with corrupt officials and prison insiders? No. There's something much bigger at play here. People you can't even imagine, people who have been orchestrating things for decades. It's not just about the escape. It's about power, global power. You're pulling at threads that will unravel everything. Caroline's voice was steady when she spoke, despite the fear creeping into her words. So, what do you expect us to do? Back off? I expect you to be smart, Marcus snapped. The truth is dangerous. It will destroy everything you think you know. You want to expose them? Fine. But be prepared for the cost. There's no going back after this. Jake was silent, weighing Marcus's words. The stakes had always been high, but now they felt insurmountable. They were dealing with a network that stretched beyond their understanding, beyond anything they could have imagined. What had started as an investigation into a 60-year-old escape had turned into something far more complicated, far more dangerous. I don't care about the cost, Jake said finally, his voice hard with resolve. I'm going to finish this. We're going to expose them. No matter what it takes. Caroline looked at him, her eyes dark with the same determination. We're in this together, Jake. We finish this, or we don't finish at all. Marcus's voice softened, a final warning in his words. Then be ready for the storm that's coming. You're not going to like what you find at the center of it all. As Jake and Caroline hung up the phone, the weight of the situation sank in. Marcus's words echoed in Jake's mind. There was no turning back now. They had crossed a line, and there was no way to undo what they had started. The truth was waiting. And they were ready to face it, no matter the cost. The storm was coming. And they were about to be caught right in the middle of it. The night was restless. Even with the soft hum of traffic outside, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every knock at the door, every phone call, every car that passed by their apartment felt like a warning. They had crossed a line. They weren't just investigating a 60-year-old escape anymore, they were staring down the barrel of a conspiracy that reached deep into the heart of power. And as much as they wanted to expose it, the cost was becoming clearer by the second. Jake, I don't think we can keep doing this, Caroline said, breaking the silence. She had been sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a furrowed brow. Her voice was low, almost hesitant, as though she were trying to make sense of everything they had uncovered. Jake glanced up, meeting her gaze. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of the investigation pressing down on her, just as it was on him. But he also saw something else, a flicker of fear. I'm not stopping now, Jake said, his voice firmer than he felt. We're too far in. If we back off, then they win. We can't let that happen. Caroline sighed, setting the phone down on the coffee table. I know. But this is getting dangerous, Jake. Marcus's warnings, everything we've uncovered. I don't think we fully understand what we're dealing with. The people behind this, they're not just going to sit by and let us tear down their empire. If we keep going, we're not just risking our lives, we're risking everyone around us. Jake felt his stomach tighten. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. But in the back of his mind, he knew she was right. They were standing at the edge of something massive, something dangerous. Every lead, every new piece of information only made it more real. They weren't just exposing a decades-old prison escape, they were peeling back the layers of a global network, one that could bring down powerful people in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. We don't have a choice, Jake said, his voice tight. This is bigger than us. We finish this, or we let them keep controlling everything. Caroline didn't argue. She just looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. But we do this carefully. No more reckless moves. If we're going to keep digging, we need to stay ahead of them. We need to control the narrative. Jake knew she was right. They needed to be smart. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. But it didn't matter. They couldn't stop now. The next morning, they met with Marcus again. He had insisted on meeting in person this time, and Jake had a feeling it wasn't just because of the information they needed to exchange. The air between them was different now, charged, tense. Marcus knew as well as they did that there was no turning back. They sat at the same bar, the one where they had met before. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet, in many ways, it was only the beginning of what was to come. The place was quieter now, and Marcus was already waiting when Jake and Caroline walked in. His usual guarded expression was gone, replaced by something colder, more distant. "You're sure about this?" Marcus asked, his voice low. "Because once you go down this road, there's no coming back. You'll have enemies you can't even begin to imagine." Jake didn't hesitate. "We're sure. Let's get this over with. We're ready to take it all the way." Marcus studied him for a long moment, his gaze intense. Finally, he slid a folder across the table. "This is everything we have left. The final pieces. After this, we need to move fast. They'll be coming for us soon." Jake opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. There were more names, more locations, some familiar, others new. There were also records that linked the operation to government contractors, military officials, and private security firms. It was all starting to make sense, too much sense. The network wasn't just a criminal operation, it was a machine, a well-oiled system that controlled everything from prison escapes to international espionage. And at the center of it all was the Alcatraz escape, a carefully planned distraction to cover up a far larger agenda. "Who's running this?" Caroline asked, her voice sharp. "There's no way it's just a group of rogue agents or corrupt officials. Someone has to be pulling the strings." Marcus nodded, his fingers tapping on the edge of his glass. "The truth? You're not going to like it. There's a cabal, a secret faction within the highest echelons of power. Some of them are corporate executives, others are high-ranking government officials, and some are even military figures. They've been in control of this for decades." Jake's mind raced as he processed the implications. So, this isn't just about money or power. This is about something much bigger. Marcus's eyes hardened. "Yes. They control everything. And they'll do anything to keep it that way." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. They ran the information through every possible channel, hoping to find any lead that could point them to the people behind the operation. But the deeper they dug, the more impossible it seemed to track down the true masterminds. They were too well hidden, their operations too deeply embedded in the system. Then, late one night, they got a call from Marcus. "We've got a location," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "It's a safe house, just outside the city. It's where they've been meeting. We need to move now. Jake and Caroline wasted no time. They gathered their things and left, their hearts pounding in their chests. This was it. The final push. If they could get to the safe house, if they could find the people behind the operation, they would have everything they needed to expose the conspiracy. But the more they thought about it, the more they realized just how dangerous this was. There was no turning back. As they pulled up to the location, Jake's phone buzzed. He checked it, his stomach dropping when he saw the message, "They know." His hands shook as he turned to Caroline. "We've been compromised. They know we're coming." Caroline's face drained of color, but her expression was determined. "We don't have a choice. We finish this. Now." They parked the car a few blocks away and began to move quietly toward the building. Every step felt like it could be their last. But they were ready. They had come too far to back down now. The safe house was a nondescript building, tucked away behind rows of old warehouses. The lights were dim, the streets deserted. But as they approached, Jake felt the unmistakable tension in the air. They weren't alone. A shadow flickered in the corner of his eye. Someone was watching them. Jake and Caroline paused, exchanging a look. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard, not now. They moved in sync, staying close to the walls, their footsteps muffled by the soft dirt beneath their feet. The door to the safe house was slightly ajar. They slipped inside, weapons drawn, ready for anything. But as they entered, the room was empty, except for one thing, a single file on the table, labeled "Final Stage." Jake's heart skipped a beat as he picked it up, opening it to reveal the final pieces of the puzzle. This wasn't just about the escape anymore. It was about something far more dangerous. And now, they had the key to bring it all crashing down. But the question was, would they survive long enough to use it? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The file in Jake's hands felt like a weight too heavy to bear. He stared at the words on the cover, "Final Stage," and the gravity of it all hit him like a tidal wave. This was it. The last piece of the puzzle. The one thing that would expose the conspiracy they had been chasing for weeks. The thing that would tie everything together, the prison escape, the shadowy figures, the global web of power they'd uncovered. But as he opened the file, the dread that had been gnawing at him only deepened. Inside, there were a series of photographs, grainy images of people in nondescript clothing, standing in various locations, some near Alcatraz, others in hidden locations across the country. There were also more maps, places that Jake hadn't yet connected to the operation, places that hinted at a much larger scale of influence. The pages that followed contained a list of names, high-ranking officials, CEOs, military generals, each one a part of a much darker network. And at the very end of the file, a single sentence stood out in bold letters. "This is the endgame. The final move is in motion." Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Caroline," he whispered, his voice barely above a tremor. "This is bigger than we thought. They're not just covering up an escape. They're orchestrating something catastrophic." Caroline moved closer, peering over his shoulder at the file. "What is this? A final move? What do they mean?" Before Jake could respond, there was a sharp noise from outside, a door creaking open, the sound of footsteps moving closer. His heart skipped a beat. "Get down," Jake hissed, grabbing Caroline's arm and pulling her into the shadows. The two of them pressed themselves into the corner, the file clutched tightly in Jake's hands. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped just outside the door. There was a pause, as if someone was waiting for them to make a mistake. The air in the safe house felt suffocating, the silence oppressive. Jake's eyes darted around the room, looking for any possible exit or hiding place. But the reality hit him hard, they were trapped. If they were caught, they might never make it out alive. The door creaked open slowly, and a figure stepped inside. "Marcus," Jake breathed, barely able to contain the shock in his voice. Marcus's figure stood at the threshold, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. His face was shadowed, but his eyes glinted with an unsettling calmness. "You shouldn't have come here," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with an eerie finality. Jake's hand tightened around the file. "What's going on, Marcus?" "We're not backing down. We're exposing this." A slight smile crossed Marcus's lips, but it wasn't reassuring. "You're too late, Jake. The pieces are already in place. The final stage has begun. You've uncovered a small part of a much bigger operation, but the real truth, well, that's something you'll never be able to grasp. It's too far gone." Caroline's voice cut through the tension, low and sharp. "Who are you really, Marcus? You're not just some informant. You've been playing us from the start, haven't you?" Marcus's gaze flickered for just a moment, and that brief lapse was enough for Jake to realize the depth of the manipulation. He wasn't just a pawn in their game, he had been an insider all along. "You were never meant to know the full truth," Marcus replied, his voice colder now. "You thought you were uncovering a simple story. You thought you were exposing corruption in a prison escape. But this? This is so much bigger. You've seen the file, but you have no idea how deep it goes." Jake's mind raced. What's the final move? What's happening now? Marcus stepped further into the room, his presence oppressive. "You'll see soon enough. It's already started. And there's nothing you can do to stop it." The room felt smaller now. Jake's grip on the file tightened as he realized the weight of Marcus's words. The final stage wasn't just some endgame scenario. It was happening right now. They were part of something much larger than they had ever imagined. "I thought you were on our side," Caroline said, her voice cracking slightly with disbelief. Marcus didn't flinch. "I am on my side, Caroline. Always have been. And I gave you what you needed to see. But you've played your part. Now, the pieces are in motion. And there's no turning back." The truth hit Jake like a punch to the gut. Marcus hadn't been helping them. He'd been manipulating them, using their search for answers to further a much darker agenda. He had planted the seeds, given them just enough to get them involved, and now they were too deep to escape. "Why? What's in it for you?" Jake demanded, his voice barely holding together. Marcus's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Control. Power. The same thing that's always been at the heart of this. You think the people behind this operation care about a prison escape? No. It's about something much bigger, something global. And I've been helping them orchestrate it all along. You were never meant to stop them." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. "So, what now? What happens to us?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. "You've got two options, Jake. You can walk away, pretend you never saw any of this, and live your life. Or you can keep digging. But if you do, the final stage won't just ruin your lives, it will ruin everyone you've ever known." Caroline's voice was firm now, her fear turning into cold resolve. "We don't back down. You can't scare us into silence." For the first time, something shifted in Marcus's expression, his eyes narrowed, his posture tense. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. No one walks away from this. The people who run this operation. They don't just erase people, they disappear them." Jake's stomach twisted. The stakes were higher than he'd realized. They weren't just investigating a conspiracy, they were standing on the edge of a world that could swallow them whole. But he wouldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything they had uncovered. "We'll expose it," Jake said, his voice resolute. "No matter what." Marcus's smile faded, and for a moment, there was something almost sad in his eyes. "I warned you, Jake. But you won't listen. The storm is coming. And you're about to be right in the middle of it. Without another word, Marcus turned and walked out of the room, leaving Jake and Caroline in stunned silence. The tension in the room was palpable. The file in Jake's hands suddenly felt like a ticking time bomb. They had just uncovered the final stage of a global conspiracy, one that was already in motion, one that could change everything. But at what cost? Caroline was the first to speak, her voice steady but full of resolve. We finish this. We expose them, no matter what it takes. Jake nodded, his mind made up. We don't run. We push forward. The world needs to know the truth. The storm was coming. And they were going to face it head-on. But in the end, would the truth be enough to save them, or would it destroy everything they held dear? The days that followed were a blur, a mix of fear, anticipation, and adrenaline. Jake and Caroline had a decision to make. They were no longer simply investigating a historic prison break. What they had uncovered was a vast conspiracy, an international operation stretching far beyond Alcatraz. Now, with Marcus's warning hanging over them like a dark cloud, they knew that the next few moves would be the most dangerous of all. But there was no turning back. The storm was coming, and they were going to be right in the middle of it. Their first priority was to piece together everything they had learned. The file they had gotten from Marcus contained critical information, names, locations, and links that pointed toward a network that was much larger than anyone had ever suspected. And at the center of it all, Alcatraz was merely a distraction, a smoke screen meant to cover up the true nature of the operation. Caroline had insisted on going through the file meticulously, her sharp eyes catching details that Jake might have missed. Every name, every date, every connection seemed to lead back to the same place, an organization so powerful, so well-funded, that it could operate in the shadows without fear of being exposed. Their reach extended from government officials to high-profile business leaders, and even military contractors, all of them linked to the final stage, whatever that meant. They were getting closer. But they were also being watched. I don't like this, Jake, Caroline said one evening as they sat in their dimly lit apartment, poring over the file once again. This isn't just about some shady operation. This is global. It's huge. They have people everywhere. Jake ran his fingers through his hair, his mind racing. I know. We're up against more than we thought. But we can't stop now. We have to expose them, or it's all for nothing. Caroline sighed, her gaze drifting to the window. The streets outside were quiet, but Jake could almost feel the weight of the world pressing in on them. The truth was, they were running out of time. The phone rang, cutting through the tension in the room. It was a secure line, one of the few they had left. Jake answered, his heart pounding in his chest. Jake, the voice on the other end was familiar, too familiar. It was Marcus. You've been digging too deep. You need to stop. Jake's blood ran cold. You're one to talk. You've been playing us this whole time. What do you want? Listen to me, Marcus's voice was sharp, urgent. This isn't a game. The final stage is more than just a conspiracy. You've only scratched the surface. You have no idea what you're dealing with. If you keep pushing, they'll come for you. And when they do, they won't stop until you're gone. Jake stood up, pacing the room. We've come this far. We're not backing down. You can't stop us now. You don't understand, Marcus said, his voice lowering. The people you're after, they've already set their plan in motion. It's too big for you to fight. Too powerful. You'll only get yourself killed. Caroline walked over, her expression determined. She could hear the conversation clearly from across the room. He's bluffing. We can't let him scare us. Jake nodded. You've been feeding us lies from the start, Marcus. If we're going to go down, we're going to go down fighting. You don't get to control this anymore. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a soft chuckle. You think you have a choice. The storm is coming, and it's going to swallow you whole. Just remember, when it all falls apart, I warned you. And then the line went dead. Jake stood there for a moment, his hand still gripping the phone, his heart racing. Marcus wasn't just trying to stop them, he was trying to control the narrative. But it was too late. They had already made their decision. Caroline stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. He's not going to stop us, Jake. We've come too far. Jake exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the room as if he expected something, or someone, to come bursting through the door at any moment. The sense of danger was palpable now, as if they were caught in a slow, inevitable descent towards something they couldn't escape. We need to move fast, Jake said. We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We have the truth now, and if we can get it to the right people, we can bring this whole thing down. But we have to act before they silence us. The next few days were spent in a frantic blur of activity. Jake and Caroline began to reach out to their few remaining contacts, journalists, whistleblowers, anyone who might be able to help them expose the conspiracy. But even as they did, they knew the clock was ticking. The final stage was already in motion, and they couldn't afford to waste any more time. They compiled the information into a comprehensive report, detailing everything they had learned about the operation, the links to government officials, the corporations involved, the shady dealings that had allowed the conspiracy to flourish for so long. They even included the final piece, the shadowy organization that had orchestrated everything, the one that Marcus had been working for all along. Caroline worked late into the night, pulling together the final details of their investigation. Jake was by her side, reading through the evidence one last time. He knew it wasn't perfect. There were still pieces of the puzzle they hadn't figured out. But they had enough. They had to get this out. The world needed to know the truth. As they prepared to send the report to their contacts, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was an unease that had been growing since their conversation with Marcus, an instinctive sense that something was wrong. And then it happened. A knock at the door. Jake's heart skipped a beat. They hadn't expected anyone. Not now. He motioned for Caroline to stay quiet, then moved cautiously toward the door. He peered through the peephole, his breath catching in his throat when he saw who it was. It was a man in a dark suit, an official-looking figure, someone who didn't belong. Jake took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he had kept hidden for just such a moment. Caroline's eyes widened as she saw his movement. She grabbed her own phone, ready to call for help. But before she could dial, the door burst open. The man in the suit stepped inside, his expression cold and businesslike. "Jake Armstrong," he said, his voice low and commanding. "You've been warned." Jake's heart pounded. This was it, the final confrontation. But he wasn't going down without a fight. "Get out," Jake said, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. "You're not going to scare me into silence." The man didn't flinch. "I'm not here to scare you, Jake. I'm here to finish this. You've gone too far." The storm had arrived. And now, there was no escaping it. The final stage was in motion. And there was only one thing left to do: survive. The tension in the room was thick, like the air just before a thunderstorm. Jake stood at the doorway, his heart hammering in his chest, trying to remain calm. The man in the suit had walked in with an air of authority, like he knew the exact moment he needed to make his move. It was clear, they were up against something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Caroline's hand hovered over her phone, her eyes narrowed as she analyzed the situation. The man didn't look like someone who would make threats without following through. The cold, calculated expression on his face told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a random visit. This was the beginning of something much darker. "Who sent you?" Jake demanded, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. He couldn't afford to show fear, not now. Not when they were so close. The man in the suit didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked further into the room, scanning the file on the table. His eyes flicked over the documents, everything they had painstakingly gathered over the past weeks. He was taking his time, as if savoring the moment. Jake could see that he was toying with them, trying to assert control. Finally, he spoke. "You're in way over your head, Jake. And your little crusade has become a problem. A very big problem." Jake's gaze hardened. "You think I'm scared of you? We're not backing down. Not now." The man chuckled softly, his voice almost mocking. "You misunderstand. It's not about fear, Jake. It's about understanding the situation. You've dug too deep. And now, you're part of something much bigger than you can possibly comprehend." Caroline stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "What do you want from us? Why are you here?" The man finally turned his gaze toward her, his eyes cold as ice. "I'm here to offer you a choice. You can stop. You can walk away, forget everything you've learned, and live your lives. No more digging. No more reporting. No more interference. And if we don't?" Jake challenged, his grip tightening on the edge of the table. The man's smile was thin, almost pitying. "If you don't, then everything you've uncovered will be erased. You'll be erased. Do you think the people behind this, people with influence and power, will let a couple of journalists stand in their way? You're nothing. Just two pieces in a much bigger game." Jake's chest tightened, the weight of the threat hanging heavily in the air. But there was no fear. Only resolve. They had come this far. They couldn't back down now. "Erased?" Caroline said, her voice shaking but resolute. "What does that even mean? You think we're just going to stop?" The man's expression turned dark. "I don't think you'll have a choice." Suddenly, the door behind him slammed shut with a force that made Jake's heart jump. There was a shift in the air, something had changed. The calm facade of the man in the suit faltered for a moment. He was no longer the confident, untouchable figure standing in front of them. He was now something else, something dangerous. Jake's instincts kicked in. He knew they needed to act quickly. "Who do you work for?" he demanded. The man's lips twisted into a sneer. "You really don't get it, do you, Jake? I don't work for anyone. I am the system. You've been playing with forces you don't understand. And now you're about to see just how far they'll go to protect themselves." The man's hand twitched toward his jacket, and for a moment, Jake feared he was reaching for a weapon. But instead, he pulled out a small, sleek device. It was a phone, but not like any phone Jake had ever seen before. It looked high-tech, military-grade, almost alien in its design. With one quick motion, the man tapped the screen, and the room's lights flickered. Jake's pulse quickened as he watched the man's fingers move with precision. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't good. "Get out of the way," Caroline ordered, pushing Jake toward the side. She could see what was happening too. The man was activating something, probably some sort of security system, and they needed to get out of the room before it was too late. But it was already too late. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the air, loud and clear, like it was coming from every direction at once. The man's device had connected to some kind of speaker system, and the voice, deep, authoritarian, and unmistakably powerful, made Jake freeze in place. "Jake Armstrong. Caroline Winters. You've been warned. You've crossed a line. The final stage is in motion. You will not survive this." The voice sent chills down Jake's spine. It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration. The people they were up against had eyes everywhere. "You think you can just stop this?" Jake asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "You think you can make us disappear and that's it? This isn't just about a couple of people anymore. We've got the truth. And we're not backing down. The man's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You don't understand the weight of what you're dealing with. There's no going back. There are no more choices. And with that, the man turned, walking toward the door. But before he left, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. You've made a mistake. But don't worry. I'll make sure it's the last one you make. The door slammed shut behind him, and for a moment, Jake and Caroline were left in stunned silence, the weight of his words still hanging in the air like a heavy fog. I don't get it, Caroline whispered. What do we do now? Jake's mind raced. They were running out of time. They couldn't just sit here and wait for whatever final stage was coming for them. There had to be a way to stay one step ahead, some way to outsmart them. But how? Jake turned toward the window, looking out at the dark streets below. It felt like the world was closing in around them, as if every shadow, every car that passed, and every stranger on the street was a potential threat. They were being hunted. There was no escaping it. But Jake knew one thing for sure, they couldn't stop now. Not after everything they'd uncovered. He turned to Caroline, his eyes fierce with determination. We keep going. We get this information out, no matter the cost. The world needs to know what's happening. Caroline nodded, her eyes hardening with the same resolve. We finish this. We don't let them win. And just like that, they knew what had to be done. The storm had already arrived, and now, they would face it head-on. There was no turning back. No second chances. They had to survive the final stage, and bring the truth to light. No matter what it took. The pressure was mounting with every passing hour. The days were becoming a blur, fueled by adrenaline, sleepless nights, and a constant awareness that danger was always just one step behind them. Jake and Caroline had no illusions left. They knew they couldn't just run anymore. The final stage was real, and it was closing in on them faster than they could prepare. Jake's apartment, once a place of refuge, had transformed into their command center. Papers were scattered everywhere, detailing everything they had learned over the past few weeks. Marcus's cryptic messages, the shady business connections, and now, the ominous warning from the man in the suit. They had uncovered a conspiracy that went deeper than they had ever imagined, but every new discovery only led them to more questions, and more dangers. Caroline sat at the table, eyes focused on her laptop screen. She had spent the last few hours trying to trace the final pieces of their investigation. They had a report ready, but they needed more than just facts, they needed proof. Something concrete, something that would force the authorities to take notice. But every lead they followed seemed to hit a dead end. This is impossible, Caroline muttered, rubbing her eyes in frustration. Every time we get close to something, it's like someone's covering their tracks. Jake walked over, peering over her shoulder at the screen. The search results were a graveyard of dead links, blocked websites, and encrypted messages. He clenched his fists, trying to think of their next move. We're being targeted. It's no surprise they've covered their tracks. But we have to find a way to get this information out, he said, his voice low and tense. Caroline looked at him, her eyes sharp. And if we can't? What if they shut us down before we can even make a move? Jake's throat tightened. He didn't have an answer for that. But the alternative, sitting idly by while everything they had uncovered was erased, was worse than any danger they could face. They had to act, and they had to act now. A loud knock on the door suddenly broke their concentration. The noise echoed through the apartment, and for a split second, Jake's heart skipped a beat. Was it him again? The man in the suit? Or worse, someone more dangerous? Jake exchanged a quick glance with Caroline. They hadn't exactly made any friends along the way, and anyone knocking on their door now would have a reason for being here, none of them good. He motioned for Caroline to stay quiet and moved toward the door. His hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment, his pulse quickening. He wasn't sure who was on the other side, but the stakes were too high to take any chances. Slowly, he opened the door a crack, peering through the small gap. To his surprise, it wasn't the man in the suit. It wasn't anyone they recognized, either. Standing in front of him was a woman, dressed in business attire, her eyes sharp and calculating. She was holding a briefcase in one hand, her other hand tucked in her coat pocket. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here to help you." Jake's suspicions immediately went up. No one had come to them offering help. They were on their own in this fight, and anyone who claimed to be helping had an agenda. "Help us?" Jake repeated, eyeing her with skepticism. "How exactly do you plan to do that?" The woman took a step closer, not waiting for an invitation to enter. "My name is Evelyn Brooks," she said. "I work for an organization that's been tracking the same people you're after. We've been watching you for a while." Jake's mind raced. They had been watched. That didn't exactly put him at ease. "What do you want?" Caroline asked, her voice tight. "And why should we trust you?" Evelyn smiled, but there was no warmth in it, just cold calculation. "Because I can get you the proof you need to expose them. I know what they've been doing. I know who's involved, and I can get you access to the final piece of the puzzle." Jake was silent for a moment, processing her words. It was risky, trusting a stranger in this situation, but they were running out of time. Their options were dwindling, and if there was even a chance she could help them, they had to consider it. "And what do you want in return?" Jake asked cautiously. Evelyn's smile faltered, but she didn't hesitate. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in taking them down. I'm not here for the glory. I'm here because this needs to end." Jake glanced at Caroline. Her expression was unreadable, but Jake could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. They were already in too deep to back out now. But trusting Evelyn meant stepping into an even darker world. It was dangerous, and it could very well be a trap. But then again, what wasn't? "I'm listening," Jake said finally, stepping aside to let her in. "Tell us what you know." Evelyn stepped into the apartment, her eyes immediately scanning the room. "I have access to encrypted communications. High-level meetings, private dossiers, everything you need to bring them to justice. But you have to trust me. We don't have a lot of time." The urgency in her voice caught Jake's attention. Whatever she was offering, it was important. And it was their best shot. "All right," Jake said, his tone firm. "What's the catch?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "No catch. Just information. You can take it and run with it. But I need you to know something." She paused, locking eyes with both of them. "Once you have this, there's no going back. You'll be targets. Not just for the people you're after, but for others who want to keep this under wraps. So be prepared for the fallout." Caroline stepped forward, her voice sharp. "We've already come this far. We're not stopping now." Evelyn nodded, her face serious. "Then let's make sure you survive this." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a small USB drive, handing it to Jake. "This is everything. The names, the locations, the plan. It's all here." Jake took the drive, feeling its weight in his hand. It was small, unassuming, but inside it was their future, or their destruction. "This is it," he said, looking at Caroline. "This is what we needed." Evelyn stepped back, moving toward the door. "I'm going to help you get this out. But once you do, stay low. They'll come for you. And when they do, you'll need to be ready." With that, she turned and left, closing the door behind her. Jake and Caroline were alone again, but now they had what they needed. The last piece of the puzzle. They couldn't waste any more time. They had to act. Jake glanced at Caroline, his face grim but determined. "We finish this." The clock was ticking. The storm was closing in. And now, they were ready to fight back. The final countdown had begun. The USB drive felt like a lead weight in Jake's pocket. He knew what it held, the last piece of the puzzle they'd been chasing for weeks. But the weight of it wasn't just physical. It was the weight of their future, the weight of every choice they'd made that had led them to this point. Caroline was already at the desk, pacing back and forth as she reviewed the plans they'd drawn up. They'd come up with a strategy, carefully mapped out, meticulously thought through. But the deeper they dug into this investigation, the more Jake felt like they were wading through a fog. The goalposts kept shifting, and with every new piece of information, the danger grew. "We need to be careful about how we release this," Caroline said, stopping in front of the desk and locking eyes with Jake. "If we go public with this now, we risk putting everything, and everyone, on the line. The people we're dealing with, they don't care about collateral damage." Jake nodded. He understood the stakes better than anyone. But they were running out of time. The longer they waited, the harder it would be to escape. The man in the suit had made it clear that they were being hunted. Every move they made would be watched. Every person they contacted could be compromised. But the longer they waited, the more the truth stayed buried. "We have no choice," Jake said, the words coming out more forcefully than he'd intended. "We need to expose them before they get to us. This information can't stay locked away any longer." Caroline looked uncertain for a moment, but then her face set in determination. She was right, though. They couldn't afford to sit back and let this unfold on its own. They had to take control, even if it meant taking risks. "You're right," Caroline said quietly. "We've got the truth. It's time to put it out there." Jake grabbed his phone, tapping in the contact information for a few trusted journalists they had worked with in the past. The ones who weren't afraid to take on the powerful elite. He had to trust that someone would be able to get the information out safely. But in the back of his mind, the nagging thought of Evelyn's warning lingered. "Once you release this, you're on the radar," Evelyn had said. "And it's not just those people you're after. Others will want to silence you." It was the others that worried Jake. The ones who weren't even on their radar yet. The ones who could end this entire investigation in an instant, before anyone even knew what was going on. Jake took a deep breath and pressed send. "This is it," he said, staring at the screen as the message containing the encrypted data left his phone. It would be a matter of hours, maybe less, before someone picked it up. Someone who would understand the magnitude of the information they had. Caroline moved to stand next to him. She didn't say anything at first, but Jake could see the doubt in her eyes. She was scared, and rightfully so. The moment they sent that data, their lives would change forever. "How long do you think we have before they come for us?" Caroline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake didn't want to admit it, but he knew the answer. "Not long. We've already crossed too many lines. If they haven't found us already, they will soon." There was a tense silence as both of them processed the weight of that reality. They were now sitting ducks in a game they hadn't signed up for. They weren't just uncovering a story, they were in it. All the way in. Suddenly, a sharp knock on the door broke the quiet tension. Jake's heart jumped in his chest. His first instinct was to freeze, to wait for the danger to pass. But it was already too late. If they had come for them, they were already here. Caroline's eyes darted to the window, then back to Jake. "You're sure no one else knows where we are?" Jake nodded, though his own mind was racing. "We've been careful. Too careful to get sloppy now." But just as he moved toward the door, a familiar voice called through the thin wood. "Jake? Caroline? It's me, Marcus." Relief flooded Jake's body, though it was short-lived. Why was Marcus here? They had agreed to keep a low profile. They couldn't afford to meet anyone in person. Not now. Jake opened the door cautiously, and there stood Marcus, looking more worn than Jake had ever seen him. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, as though he hadn't slept in days. "Marcus," Jake said, a mixture of relief and suspicion in his voice. "What's going on?" "We said no more visits." Marcus glanced over his shoulder, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know. But we're past the point of no return now. I've been watching your movements, there's a team of men coming. They're on their way here right now." Jake's stomach dropped. The truth was, he had expected something like this. The moment they'd pushed the send button, they had sealed their fate. Caroline stepped forward, her eyes searching Marcus's face. "Who's coming? What's happening? They're not just some hired goons. I've been tracking them. They're the real deal, high-level security, ex-military," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. "If we don't move now, they'll take you both down without hesitation. You're not just dealing with corporate executives anymore, Jake. You're dealing with shadow operations. People who don't leave witnesses." Jake took a moment to process what Marcus was saying. They were no longer just in danger from the people they were investigating. This had become personal. Whoever was behind the conspiracy, they had the resources to erase anyone who got in their way. "What do we do?" Caroline asked, her voice sharp with urgency. Marcus exhaled slowly. "We need to go. Now. I've arranged a safe house for you. It's not much, but it's better than staying here. They'll be here in minutes." The tension in the room thickened as Jake and Caroline exchanged a look. They had no choice. They couldn't stay here. Marcus moved quickly, grabbing his things and heading toward the door. Jake followed close behind, the weight of the USB drive still heavy in his pocket. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. But as they stepped into the hallway, a sudden sound caught their attention. A distant rumble, like a truck idling outside the building. Jake froze. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, or someone knocking on a door. It was a vehicle. Something was wrong. The walls of the apartment building felt like they were closing in on them, and the only thing Jake knew for sure was that the clock was ticking faster than they could outrun it. They had no choice but to go. And fast. The final countdown was in motion. The safe house was a far cry from the sleek, high-end apartments Jake and Caroline were used to. It was in a quiet neighborhood, nestled in the heart of a rundown block that had seen better days. The house itself was small, inconspicuous, and the kind of place that wouldn't attract much attention. But in a way, that was the point. As they walked up the narrow path toward the front door, Marcus led the way, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, as if expecting someone to leap out of the shadows. The tension in the air was palpable. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that every move they made was being tracked. "Stay close," Marcus muttered as he unlocked the front door. "We can't be sure we've shaken them." "Not yet." Jake nodded, but his mind was racing. He could feel the pulse of his own heart quicken as he stepped inside. The house smelled musty, old, like it hadn't been lived in for years, but at least it felt safe. For now. The door clicked shut behind them, and Marcus motioned them inside. The living room was sparsely furnished, with only a few chairs and a worn couch. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of a man and a woman standing together on a beach. Jake wasn't sure if it was the photo of a family or just an image left behind by previous tenants, but in this moment, it felt like a distant reminder of a life that wasn't theirs. A life they couldn't afford to live anymore. "Everything's secure," Marcus said, locking the door behind them. He moved to the small kitchen, where he pulled a few bottles of water from the fridge. "But we don't have much time to settle in. We've got a few hours, maybe less, before they come looking for us here." Caroline sat on the couch, her eyes scanning the room. Her brow furrowed as she took in their new surroundings. She was trying to stay calm, but Jake could tell she was on edge. This wasn't just another hideout. This was their last chance before everything fell apart. "What's the plan, Marcus?" Caroline asked, her voice quiet but firm. "How are we supposed to stay one step ahead of them?" Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, folding his arms. "We don't stay one step ahead. Not this time. We hunker down, keep our heads low, and wait for the right moment. The moment to get the information out." Jake's eyes narrowed. "You really think we can just wait? After everything we've uncovered, we're supposed to sit here and hope for the best?" Marcus met his gaze evenly. "You don't have a choice. Whoever is after you, they don't leave witnesses. They've been cleaning up their messes for years, and now you too are in their sights. You have to make sure you're in the right position to strike back." Caroline sighed. "And what does that mean for us? You want us to just sit here, with no idea how long we'll be safe, hoping for a miracle?" "Pretty much," Marcus replied, his tone grim. "You can't take them on directly. Not yet. You need to have the leverage first. If you try to expose them too soon, they'll cover their tracks and shut you down before you get anywhere." Jake rubbed his temples. His thoughts were a whirlwind, his emotions in turmoil. Every minute they spent here was another minute they were closer to being found. Every second was precious. What if we use the time to get the data to the right people? Jake suggested, his voice more calculated now. "The journalists, the ones we've worked with before. They have connections. We can trust them." Marcus gave him a sharp look. "And you think you can trust them when they're the ones who'll have the evidence? If you expose it too early, you'll have to deal with more than just them. You'll be putting everyone in danger." Jake clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling up inside. "Then what do you suggest we do, Marcus? Just sit here and wait to be found?" The clock was ticking. The morning after Marcus's warning felt no different than the days before. Time moved slowly in the safe house, too slowly. Jake had woken early, the weight of their situation bearing down on him with every passing hour. He didn't sleep well anymore. Every creak of the house, every passing car outside, made his heart race. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, pushing him to take action, to do something, anything, before it was too late. Caroline was in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, staring out the window. Her brow was furrowed, lost in thought. She hadn't said much since Marcus had left them in the dead of night, leaving only vague instructions on how to prepare for the inevitable. He'd promised to help, but Jake could see in his eyes that even Marcus didn't have all the answers. They were out of their depth, trapped in a game they didn't fully understand. Jake sat across from her, his fingers drumming on the table. "How long do you think we can keep this up?" he asked quietly, breaking the silence that had settled over them. Caroline didn't immediately answer. She set the coffee down, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for an escape that didn't exist. "I don't know. It feels like we're just waiting for the inevitable," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "Waiting for them to find us." Jake shifted in his seat, his fingers still tapping rhythmically on the wooden table. "You think we should just give up?" Caroline's gaze snapped to his, her eyes sharp. "No. But I don't know what more we can do. We're stuck. We're hiding here, hoping that Marcus's plan will work out, but every second that passes, we're closer to being found." Jake felt the gnawing truth of her words settle deep in his chest. It wasn't just the threat of being found. It was the weight of the data they'd uncovered, the evidence that could change everything. If they released it too soon, they risked being silenced before anyone had a chance to act. If they waited too long, they might not get the chance at all. "I don't like the idea of just sitting here," Jake admitted. "But what choice do we have?" Caroline rubbed her eyes, clearly exhausted. "I just can't shake the feeling that we're being played. That this whole thing is bigger than we know. Whoever's behind this, they've covered their tracks so well. It's like they were waiting for us to stumble upon it." Jake leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, he said quietly. They've known about us from the start. They've been watching us, controlling the narrative, manipulating us into playing right into their hands. Caroline's gaze darkened as she mulled over his words. What if Marcus is right? What if we're rushing things, trying to expose them before we're truly ready? No, Marcus said, finally stepping forward. You get ready. You make sure you have the right people on your side. And when the time comes, you take them down. But it's going to be a slow burn. You need to plan carefully. Caroline stood up abruptly, walking to the window to peer out through the curtains. What do you mean, slow burn? Her voice was tinged with skepticism. We don't have time for a slow burn. They're already closing in on us. Marcus shot her a hard look, his face hardening. You think they'll just let you expose them all at once? They have resources you can't even imagine. And once you push that button, there's no turning back. They'll destroy everything and everyone you care about. Jake swallowed, the gravity of Marcus's words sinking in. This wasn't just about their lives anymore. It was about everything they had uncovered, the lives of the people who had helped them, the innocent ones who could be caught in the crossfire. Then what do we do now? Jake asked quietly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. Marcus exhaled sharply. You wait. And while you wait, you build. You reach out to the right people. You create an army of your own. This war isn't going to be won overnight. A long silence followed as each of them processed Marcus's words. The situation was dire, and every decision they made from here on out had to be calculated. There was no room for mistakes. Caroline finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. We don't have the luxury of time, Marcus. Every second we waste here is another second they're gaining on us. You're right, Marcus admitted, his eyes darkening. But trust me, rushing this won't end well. You need to play it smart. Lay low for now. When the time's right, we'll take them down. Jake felt the weight of the decision settle over him like a dark cloud. They had to trust Marcus. He had been a step ahead of them this whole time. But it didn't make the waiting any easier. And it didn't change the fact that they were running out of time. Caroline sat back down on the couch, her face pale as she stared into space. Jake joined her, sitting beside her. They couldn't outrun the storm anymore. It was here, and now all they could do was prepare for it. Outside, the world seemed oblivious to the danger that was closing in. But inside the safe house, everything felt different. The calm before the storm was always the hardest. And Jake knew one thing for sure, when the storm finally hit, they would need to be ready. But how ready was too ready? Jake clenched his fists, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Part of him wanted to act, to take the risk and release the data now, while they still had a chance. But the other part, the rational part, knew Caroline was right. They had to be strategic. They couldn't afford to be reckless. Just then, the sound of footsteps approaching the door jolted both of them from their thoughts. Jake's hand instinctively reached for the phone in his pocket, but before he could check, the door creaked open. Marcus walked in, looking more strained than the night before. His eyes were tired, his expression grim. We need to talk, Marcus said, closing the door behind him. His voice was low, urgent. There was a sense of finality to his tone that immediately set Jake on edge. What is it? Jake asked, standing up and walking toward him. Is it them? Marcus didn't answer right away. He stepped deeper into the room, closing the distance between himself and the others. The silence between them was thick, charged with anticipation. It felt like the world had paused, holding its breath. They're getting closer, Marcus finally said. And there's something you need to know. Jake's stomach tightened. What is it? They've already found out about the data you're holding. Marcus's words hit like a punch to the gut. They know who has it, and they're not going to wait much longer to come after you. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth, her face pale as she processed the weight of Marcus's statement. How? How could they know? I don't know, Marcus admitted, his voice strained. But I've been tracking their movements. They've got people everywhere, watching every angle. It won't be long before they show up here, and when they do, we'll have no choice but to run. Jake's mind raced. How much time do we have? Maybe a day. Maybe less. We have to move quickly. If they find this place, it's over. They'll clean up everything. Your lives won't matter anymore. Marcus took a step closer, lowering his voice. And neither will the information you're holding. This is bigger than just you two. They've been playing this game for years, and you're the ones who've gotten too close. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The walls of the safe house felt like they were closing in, and the clock was ticking louder with each passing second. There was no longer any time to hide. No more waiting for the perfect moment. They had to act. I'm not going to sit here and wait to be hunted, Jake said, his voice cold with determination. We have to take the fight to them. We can't afford to wait any longer. Caroline's eyes met his, a mix of fear and resolve in her gaze. She stepped forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Jake's right. We can't let them win. If we run now, we'll be running forever. We need to do something. Now. Marcus's face softened, but his voice remained grim. You don't understand. This isn't just about you anymore. They have agents, people who will do anything to stop you. And if you make the wrong move, they'll destroy everything. Everything you've worked for. Everything you love. Jake exhaled slowly, his fingers curling into fists. It was clear that there was no easy way out. They were up against something much bigger than they had ever imagined. And yet, there was no turning back now. The truth had to come out. What's the plan, then? Caroline asked, her voice steady now. We can't keep waiting. It's time to make our move. Marcus looked around the room, his gaze settling on both of them. All right, he said after a long pause. We go dark. We disappear for a while, but we use the time to make sure the data gets to the right people. You need to trust the right sources. This is the only way to stay alive. Jake nodded. Then let's do it. We're not running anymore. It's time to fight back. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. They were no longer just trying to survive, they were now in a fight for their lives, for the truth, and for everything they believed in. And as the hours ticked down, Jake knew one thing for sure, the storm was coming. And they were going to face it head-on. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus had grown more tense as the day dragged on, and Jake could see the urgency in his every move. There was a quiet undercurrent of fear hanging over the house, but it was masked by the steely resolve each of them carried. Every decision had to be calculated. There was no room for mistakes now. Jake and Caroline sat on the worn couch, going over the plan again. Their phones, once their lifelines, now lay in a pile on the table, powered down, wiped of all data. The walls in this small, temporary refuge seemed to close in with each minute that passed. They were no longer just trying to protect themselves, they were about to launch a final assault on the system that had been hunting them. We need to make sure we're not just running in circles, Caroline said, tapping her fingers nervously on the armrest. What if this doesn't work? What if we expose ourselves too soon and they catch us? Marcus, pacing across the small living room, stopped to face her. We don't have the luxury of waiting. At this point, it's a race against time. If we sit here any longer, they'll have us trapped. We'll be irrelevant before we even start. Jake knew Marcus was right. Sitting back and waiting had gotten them this far, but it was no longer an option. They needed to act. So, what's the next step? Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a fire burning inside him now. It wasn't just anger or fear, it was something more primal. The realization that they were no longer pawns in someone else's game made his blood run hot. Marcus paused, his eyes flicking to each of them. We used the chaos. The one thing they didn't count on was you two having this information, proof of everything they've been hiding. They think they've got us contained, but they don't know that we've already reached out to key players. We have allies who will ensure this goes public, no matter what. Caroline raised an eyebrow. Allies? Like who? Journalists, activists, people who have been tracking their movements for years. People who know exactly how deep this goes, Marcus explained. And if we play our cards right, we'll have the leverage to expose them to the world. The right people will get the data. But we have to be sure, Marcus, Caroline said. We can't afford to trust anyone who might be compromised. Marcus nodded, his face tightening. I know. That's why you two will be the face of this. You'll control the narrative. You've got the evidence, and you know the story better than anyone else. You're the only ones they don't have under their thumb. Jake leaned back against the wall, trying to process it all. The plan was risky, but it was the only shot they had left. He thought about the family members they'd lost, the countless people whose lives had been destroyed because of this unseen enemy. It was a sickening realization, but it was also the catalyst they needed. All right, Jake said, his voice calm but resolute. We'll do it. We'll get the story out. Caroline stood up, pacing back and forth as she mulled over the implications. This is dangerous, Jake. If they figure out what we're doing before it's too late. I know, he interrupted, the weight of the decision making his chest tighten. But if we don't do this, nothing changes. We don't get our lives back. The people we've lost don't get justice. It's all been for nothing. The silence that followed was heavy. They were standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into the unknown. The world as they knew it was about to change, one way or another. Marcus spoke up, his tone more serious now. We've got two options here, you either go underground, cut off all ties, and play it safe until things blow over. Or you take the risk, expose the truth, and fight back. There's no middle ground anymore. Jake looked at Caroline, her face set with determination. He knew she felt the same way. There was no going back. They couldn't just wait to be found. They had to make a stand. We fight, Caroline said, her voice firm. Marcus nodded approvingly. Good. You two know what you're up against. The next 24 hours will be critical. We'll set up a secure line with the right people, make sure they're ready. And when the time comes, we'll launch the story. Jake felt his heart pound in his chest. He could already picture the headlines, the world finally learning the truth about the system that had been running under everyone's nose for years. He could almost hear the shock, the outrage, the ripple of justice that would echo through the streets. But then the reality set in. There were no guarantees. This could go south fast. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting against an empire of silence. Whoever was behind this had the resources, the power, and the reach to bury anything they didn't want the world to see. What's the first step? Jake asked, his voice sharper now, filled with a sense of urgency. Marcus rubbed his face, looking worn but resolute. We need to go off the grid. They'll be watching your every move. Phones, emails, credit cards, everything. So we'll set up new identities. Get you a safe route to meet with the journalists. No direct contact. We'll use burner phones, encrypted emails, everything we can to stay out of sight. Understood, Jake said, feeling the weight of the operation settle onto his shoulders. He had to stay sharp. The plan was risky, but they didn't have time for hesitation. Caroline turned to Marcus, her face set with purpose. And what about you? Are you coming with us? Marcus gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. No. I'll stay here, keep an eye on things. I've made some contacts that can help from this side, but you two need to be the ones to deliver the truth. I'll guide you, but you'll have to carry this. Jake didn't like the idea of leaving Marcus behind, but he understood. Marcus had his own part to play in this war, and he couldn't afford to risk everything by tagging along. They had to be smart about it. We'll get it done, Jake said, more to himself than anyone else. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was personal. It was their fight. And they weren't going to back down. Marcus gave a nod of approval. Good. You've got the fire in you. That's exactly what you need right now. Caroline picked up the stack of papers and notes on the table, her fingers brushing against the rough edges of the documents. Let's move fast. The sooner we get this out, the sooner we take them down. The clock was ticking. With every passing second, they were drawing closer to their moment of reckoning. The pieces were finally in place. But as the sun began to set outside the safe house, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. They were about to play a game much bigger than themselves, and in games like this, the rules always seem to change when you least expected it. One thing was for sure, the storm wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning. The plan was in motion, and with it, the heaviness of the task ahead. Marcus had given them a list of locations, safe houses and encrypted routes they could take to get in contact with their contacts. Caroline and Jake, both moving with purpose now, had a quiet intensity in their eyes. They knew what was at stake. But as the hours ticked by and the world outside continued to turn, something gnawed at Jake's gut. He couldn't quite shake the feeling that they were being watched. That sense of paranoia, one that had started as a whisper in the back of his mind, had slowly morphed into a constant companion. Every reflection in a window, every car that passed too slowly by the house, every unfamiliar face in a crowd, they were all part of the puzzle he could no longer ignore. Caroline, on the other hand, had become more focused. The gravity of their situation had hardened her resolve. She had always been the more cautious of the two, but now, with everything on the line, she was every bit as determined as Jake. It was clear, they were no longer running from their pursuers. They were running towards something they hoped would give them a shot at survival. They gathered their gear quickly, new phones, burner wallets, cash in small denominations, and bags packed with the bare essentials. There would be no time to waste when the clock finally struck. The first move was simple, but it was the most crucial, getting out of the house without leaving a trace. Jake pulled the hood of his jacket up, casting his face in shadow. He glanced at Caroline, who gave him a reassuring nod. They had practiced this moment in their minds countless times, but now that it was happening, the tension was palpable. "Ready?" Caroline asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Jake took a deep breath, looking at her, then out the window one last time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. It was the perfect time to slip away unnoticed. "Let's do this," he said. They stepped out of the house together, their hearts pounding, but neither of them broke stride. The streets were quieter than usual, and the silence was deafening. Every step felt calculated, measured. They kept to the shadows, using alleyways and back streets to avoid detection. They weren't just trying to disappear, they were making sure they stayed invisible to anyone who might be watching. Caroline led the way, her eyes darting around as she kept a lookout. Jake followed close behind, his mind racing. They had a few hours before their contact in the media was scheduled to arrive at the next location. Everything hinged on the success of this operation, everything. The first stop was a small, inconspicuous cafe on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that blended in with its surroundings, with no one paying much attention to who came and went. Marcus had given them the address, he had worked out the details with the journalists they needed to meet. A reporter by the name of Natalie Pierce was supposed to show up around midnight. She had connections that could help them get the story into the right hands. As they approached the cafe, Jake couldn't help but feel that odd sensation creeping up his spine again. Something was wrong. There was a feeling in the air, a tension that didn't belong. The cafe appeared closed, its lights dimmed and windows drawn. It was the middle of the night, but there was something off about it. He shot a glance at Caroline. "Do you feel that?" he murmured. Caroline didn't answer immediately. She was already scanning the street ahead, her senses heightened. "Yeah," she replied quietly. "Something's not right." They walked up to the door, and Jake's hand hovered over the knob. He gave Caroline a quick glance. She shook her head slightly. She had noticed the same thing, the hairs on the back of her neck were standing up, too. "I don't like this," she muttered, voice low. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out the burner phone Marcus had given him. He quickly dialed the number they'd been given for Natalie. It rang a few times before a voice picked up, but it wasn't Natalie. "Hello?" a woman's voice asked, but there was an odd pause before she spoke, as if she'd been waiting for something. Jake's gut twisted. "Who is this?" he demanded, keeping his voice steady. "Is Natalie there?" A slight chuckle followed, cold and mechanical. "You've been set up. Don't move, Jake." Before he could react, the line went dead. "Shit," Jake hissed. His eyes snapped to Caroline, who was already backing away from the door, her hand on her weapon. "I knew it," she said through clenched teeth. "They're on to us." Jake's pulse quickened. This was it. They were being tracked, and whoever was on the other side of that call knew exactly where they were. Without wasting another second, Jake grabbed Caroline's arm and pulled her into a nearby alley. They had no time to second-guess. The world around them felt like it was collapsing. Every street corner, every shadow seemed to close in as if they were being watched from every angle. "We need to get to the backup location," Jake said, his voice hard with urgency. He checked his phone, but there was no signal. They were cut off. Caroline's eyes darted around, scanning for any sign of movement. "We don't have a choice. We go dark again." Jake grabbed her hand, pulling her further down the alley toward the street where their escape car was supposed to be parked. But as they turned the corner, they saw something that made their hearts drop, two black SUVs idling in front of the intersection, their tinted windows hiding who was inside. But Jake didn't need to guess. They both knew. "They found us," Caroline whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Jake swallowed, his throat dry. "We're not going down without a fight." But before they could make a move, a voice echoed from behind them, cutting through the night air. "Jake. Caroline, we've been waiting for you." The sound of boots on the pavement approached fast. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, every instinct screaming to run, to fight, but there was nowhere to hide now. It was too late. The net had closed. They turned, ready to face whatever was coming next. The figures emerging from the shadows weren't just any pursuers. They were methodical, calculating, the kind of people who didn't make mistakes. Jake's pulse thudded in his ears, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. He could see their movements, the way they walked in sync, as though they were a single unit instead of individuals. The kind of team that didn't need to speak to understand each other. Caroline's fingers twitched towards her weapon, but Jake grabbed her arm. "Don't. Not yet." She shot him a look that was a mixture of fear and frustration. "Jake, we need to fight. We can't just let them. We'll make a stand when we have a better chance," he whispered urgently, his eyes scanning their surroundings. There was no immediate cover here. They were exposed. "We can't afford to do anything reckless." The leader of the group, a tall man with a grim expression, stepped forward. His eyes locked onto Jake's with a knowing, almost smug, stare. "I was hoping this wouldn't be necessary," he said coolly, his voice deep and measured. "But you two made it too easy for us." Jake clenched his fists, the truth hitting him hard. They had underestimated their enemies, their assumption that the people they were meeting had been their allies was a fatal mistake. He should have known. "You're with them," Caroline spat, her voice full of disgust. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a slight nod. "I'm not just with them. I am them. The people who've been hunting you were never just a group. They're an organization, a network that goes far deeper than you could have ever imagined. And now," he paused, savoring the moment, "you've walked right into our hands." Jake's stomach twisted. He'd been so sure that their contact, Natalie, was the key to exposing the truth. But now, it seemed it had all been a setup. A carefully orchestrated betrayal. "You won't get away with this," Jake said, trying to keep his voice even though his mind was spinning with the implications of this sudden turn. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's what you think. But the reality is far different. You're just a couple of disgruntled pawns who got too close to the truth. And now, the game is over." Caroline's voice was sharp, her eyes burning with anger. "You think you can silence us? You think you'll just make us disappear?" The man's gaze flickered to the SUVs parked at the intersection, the doors still closed, a symbol of the trap that was now fully sprung. "I don't need to make you disappear. That won't be necessary. You'll be much more useful alive, for now." Jake's heart dropped. Alive? The words felt like a weight, pressing down on him. He exchanged a quick look with Caroline, silently weighing their options. They couldn't afford to be taken. There had to be a way out. "Why?" Jake demanded, his voice low but forceful. "Why betray us? What do you gain from all this?" The man laughed softly, as though Jake's question was a childish one. "You really have no idea, do you? The world you're trying to expose? It's been in the making for decades. People like you, people who think they can just shine a light on corruption, they're nuisances. But I've learned to adapt." His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "I see opportunity where you see resistance. And now I have everything I need to make sure this project goes smoothly." A cold realization began to settle in. This wasn't just about covering up their escape or protecting secrets. This was much bigger. Jake could see it now, the organization, the network of power, was more than just an effort to silence them, it was a global machine, and they were small cogs in a much darker mechanism. Before Jake could respond, one of the other figures in the group, a woman with short, dark hair, stepped forward. Her eyes scanned them with calculated interest, her expression unreadable. "You two are smarter than I gave you credit for," she said, her voice neutral. "But unfortunately, that's not enough. You've crossed a line you can't come back from." "You don't have to do this," Caroline said, her voice tight with frustration. "There are people who'll help you, there's still time to turn back." The woman's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Oh, we've been past that point for a long time. Your resistance is admirable, though. It's just too bad it's all going to be erased. But don't worry, your story will be remembered. We'll make sure of that." Jake's mind raced. Their entire world had just been upended. What now? Was this really the end of the line? "Get in the car," the leader ordered, his voice hard, final. "We're taking you to a secure location where you can finally understand the magnitude of what you've been meddling with. You'll come to realize you're only scratching the surface of the game we're playing." Caroline and Jake exchanged a glance, there was no question. They had to make their move now or risk being dragged into the darkness. "Don't let them take you," Caroline whispered. "We can't let them win." Jake nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. It was now or never. He wasn't going to give up. Not like this. The moment they'd been waiting for had arrived. Jake's hand reached for his waistband, feeling the cool metal of the weapon Marcus had given him. He knew what he had to do. Make a break for it, 'cause enough chaos to buy them time. He saw the woman's eyes flicker to his movement just a fraction too late. In an instant, Jake drew the gun, his fingers steady. A shot rang out, a deafening crack in the night air. The leader's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing in shock, as his bodyguards scrambled into action. But Jake and Caroline were already in motion, sprinting in opposite directions, breaking the formation, and diving into the shadows of the alley. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, but they didn't stop. Jake's breath was ragged, but adrenaline fueled every movement. The hunt had begun. Caroline shouted ahead to Jake. "We need to split up. Meet at the rendezvous point." They didn't need to say more. They were on their own now, and every second counted. Jake's mind focused entirely on one thing: escape. They'd been cornered, but there was still a way out. The world wasn't done with them yet. Not by a long shot. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?